Scaramouche is, on the surface, a two-faced, selfish trickster that does whatever he wants, however he wants, whenever he wants, regardless of how questionably ethical his means or goals may be. At first glance, he seems like a particularly great villain. He's the type you love to hate. The villain that always seems to somehow have the upper hand against the hero, which can be absolutely frustrating, but hey, he keeps things interesting. But there's a lot more to this guy than you may realize, and it all has to do with kabuki. I bet none of you saw that coming. And okay, before we continue, let me quickly remind you that all of this is just a theory. I am human and I am fallible, so I'll get stuff wrong from time to time. This video is not meant to be taken as a statement of fact, it's for entertainment purposes only, but if you learned something in the meantime, that's awesome, I'm proud of you. But also make sure to check the pinned comment below just in case there are any corrections, and please make sure to do your own research. With that out of the way, let's dive back into the video. But where were we? Oh right, kabuki. The overly dramatic traditional art of Japanese theater, which is probably still confusing to you guys since this is a video about Scaramouche. So let me give you a little context. If you're not already aware, the Fatui Harbingers are each named after characters from the Commedia dell'arte, which is a form of Italian theater from the 16th century. We know from Signora's drop materials that being a harbinger requires you to throw away your identity, and this is probably one of the reasons behind their use of masks. Because where are decorative masks like these usually used? In the theater. So anyway, I've had this idea for a while that the Fatui Harbingers will each represent a type of performance art from around the world. For example, Signora can be associated with the ballet, Dottore with the opera, and Scaramouche with kabuki, and Child as... Okay, I have a hard time with this one. I think he's supposed to be like a Russian soldier dance, but I'm not 100% on that. It could also be the circus, but I think the circus is reserved for Piero. Right, so anywho, kabuki Scaramucci. I still have not explained this. There are two very prominent things linking Scaramouche to kabuki. The first is his mask. Now, kabuki performers don't really wear masks, but they do paint their faces in a manner that's known as kumadori. Kumadori makeup usually begins with a layer of white over the entire face, then black accents are added to exaggerate facial features, while markings of red or blue are used to denote the archetype of the character being played. Brown, on the other hand, is used only for non-human characters. Scaramouche's mask is brown, which is fitting because he's not human. He's like an autonomous marionette, but more on that in a bit. The second prominent thing linking Scaramouche to kabuki is his name. No, not the name Scaramouche, because that's his Fatui Harbinger name. I'm talking about his real name, Kunikuzushi. Kunikuzushi literally translates into Destroyer of Provinces, which is a really weird thing to name an autonomous puppet that you released into the wild, oh wise Archon. Not sure what you were expecting of him when you gave him that kind of name, but anyway... It's not like Kunikuzushi was a name given to a type of Portuguese breech-loading swivel gun that was used in the mid-16th century and later used by Otomo Sorin as part of Toyotomi Hideyoshi's campaigns to seize control of Kyushu, which was eventually successful, right? No, it absolutely was. It totally was. Weird name to name your puppet. Just saying. Well, anyway, independently around the same time, the name Kunikuzushi began being used in the kabuki theater to describe a type of katakiyaku, or villain, that was intent on seizing control of the country. Weirdly enough, though, the markings on Scaramouche's mask have more resemblance to the markings of an Aragoto hero, or an angry, passionate hero, than they do the markings of a supernatural being. In fact, a lot of his design inspiration looks like it could have been taken straight from a kabuki character known by the name of lmao maru. His typical clothes are red and white with distinct purple checkered pattern as well as some plum blossoms, hence ume omaru, ume meaning plum. Note the checkered pattern on Scaramouche's bag and these tiny little plum blossoms on his hat accessories. As an aside, I will point out that plum, peach, and sakura blossoms are easily confused. Peach and Plum more than Sakura, which is kind of funny because peach blossoms as well as plum blossoms are often associated with the infamous Momotaro, which Scaramouche bears some small but hilarious similarities to. I'll leave a link to that story if anyone wants to read it. Anywho, weirder still, Umeomaru is a hero character who fought against a kunikuzushi. The story goes that Umeomaru's brother was tricked by this kunikuzushi, and the two then became enemies as Umeomaru fights to stop the kunikuzushi from actually seizing control of the country. I think some of you already see where I'm going with this. But first, just a tiny bit more history. I'm sure by now you're all familiar with the Sakoku Decree in Inazuma, so it should come as no surprise that the Sakoku Decree was a real thing in the Edo period. Closing the country off completely allowed Japan to achieve an incredible level of economic stability. During this time, the common folk had a lot more expendable income, which led to a rise in popularity for the theater, namely kabuki. Prior to this time period, the art of theater was mostly restricted to no, which was only really able to be attended and understood by the aristocracy. No in general was extremely spiritual, philosophical, and abstract with subdued visuals and blank masks worn over the actors' faces. In contrast, kabuki was full of stimulated colors, heavily exaggerated movements, costumes, and sensational plot lines that often poked satirical fun at governing bodies. If you're interested in learning a little bit more about No and Kabuki, I'll leave a link to an excellent video on it by Crash Course in the description box. What's kind of incredible about the stark contrast between these two forms of theater is that it immediately applies to how A and Scaramouche view the world. A is preoccupied with enlightenment. Scaramouche is entrenched in the messy web of the world. They are No and Kabuki, embodied. And fun fact, kabuki led to the creation of another form of Japanese theater known as bunraku, which is like crazy uncanny valley puppet shows. That makes A Mama the embodiment of No, Skara's son the embodiment of kabuki, and the shogun puppet daughter the embodiment of bunraku. Just hysterical to me. Also worth noting before we proceed though, in Japanese, Scaramouche and the shogun puppet are not called puppets, they're called ningyo, or dolls. This is part of the reason why I think his constellation is the doll with a heart and not the puppet on a string, because that one's definitely Sandrone. Traditionally, ningyo were used not only as toys, but as talismans. For example, protective ningyo could be given to someone like, say, a pregnant woman in order to protect her and her unborn child from any sort of diseases, harm, and ill will. This is a nuance that did not translate very well into English, in my opinion. This nuance plays off this idea in Japan that the ningyo in and of themselves were typically considered to be like living creatures, often possessing a heart and soul of their own. They're like tiny guardians or spirits taking on their owner's sins, burdens, and problems like some kind of supernatural bodyguard. They are therefore treated like living beings, even when being disposed of. Ningyo should always be given a proper sort of funeral, typically like a burning service, because it's believed that the failure to do so will result in the ningyo returning to their owners in order to seek revenge or just haunt them. You know, your problems come back to you. Anyway, so, Scaramouche, doll with a heart constellation. I'm like 99% sure of this at this point. But enough fun facts for now, because you're probably wondering why we've started this video with a real-world history lesson and completely skipped Scaramouche's backstory. And that's because his backstory is actually a little messy, and that requires the kabuki connection in order to find all the pieces and stitch them together in this messy little quilt of a weird... Anyway, you'll understand why in a minute. See, Scaramouche's backstory is really scattered all over the place, and it was more of a tell, don't show kind of thing in version 2.1. He's most notably mentioned by Yaemiko at the end of the Inazuma Archon quest, as well as in the Pale Flame artifact set's Surpassing Cup. But he's also mentioned in two other places. Once in the description for the Shake Pavilion, and again in the rather aged notes scattered across Tataratsuna. Now, there are 6 rather aged notes, 3 of them mentioning a character known as the Wandering Eccentric. The thing is, the localization does not do this term justice. The original text actually says Kabuki Mono. That's right, Kabuki. The Kabuki Mono were initially like gangs of wandering former servants of samurai that wore very colorful clothing as a form of rebellion against the norm of the time, which favored more subdued colors. And that aesthetic was then inherited by kabuki performers. And yes, kabuki mono is a term that can be used to refer to someone who does or performs kabuki. Incidentally, Scaramouche refers to himself on several occasions as a vagrant from Inazuma. Vagrant meaning wanderer, wandering eccentric, vagrant of Inazuma, kabuki mono. You with me? Now, these notes were also found in an area crawling with Fatui and even mention the Fatui themselves. Remember this for later. Now, the Shake Pavilion is also found in Tatarasuna, hidden behind a rock wall that you have to blast open with a cannon, which may or may not be based on a breech-loading swivel gun. And the description of this domain also mentions this wandering eccentric or the kabuki mono. If we combine the rather aged notes, Yaemiko's commentary, A's voice line, the Surpassing Cup, and the description of the Shake Pavilion, we are left with Scaramouche's mostly complete backstory, which I think goes something like this. After the death of the Electro Archon Makoto 500 years ago, her sister A decides to create an artificial body to house her consciousness in order to avoid erosion. Unsure if this venture would be successful, she creates at least one prototype using long-forgotten technology. This divine creation is Scaramouche. He bears a strong likeness to A's fair features, destined to a long life and a hollow will as her potential vessel. But he was only a prototype, so she cast him aside, likely within the Shake Pavilion, where someone would later discover him, disheartened and alone, but through some error, awake. He spent years, perhaps centuries, wandering around Inazuma, unable to age, yet watching the humans around him and perhaps wondering why he was the exception to the death that came for all of them. At some point, A became aware of his awakening but decided to leave him be instead of attempting to deactivate him. She had already sealed his powers, so he wasn't a danger to anyone. But alone and without guidance, Scaramouche believed himself to be superior to the humans that aged and died. The humans that were forced to follow the fates outlined within their constellations. He considered himself to be above all others and in complete control of his own destiny. Yet he still spent time with the common folk, learning their ways, until finally the Fatui found him. He joined them on a whim merely because he found them entertaining, and they granted him power through experimentation, unlocking the powers A had sealed away and perhaps further enhancing him still. These powers allowed him to climb the ranks of the Fatui Harbingers until he was named the 6th. TLDR, Scaramouche was abandoned by his mother and left to wander the streets alone until he was found by a Russian crime syndicate that took him in, trained him, and made him into a grade A weapons dealer. Absolutely A+ parenting, Miss Electro Archon A, ma'am. Also, I've said it once, I'll say it again, it's a really weird thing to call your kid the destroyer of provinces when you're the one ruling a province. It's like you're asking him to overthrow you. So don't be surprised if it happens. I mean, the guy does have the Gnosis, after all, which he never told anybody about. I mean, he had it for 3 days at least before the Traveler had that duel with Signora, and she didn't seem to be aware of it, or else she probably would have been gone already looking for the Dendro Archon. So this begs the question. What in the heck is Scaramouche trying to do? The first time we meet Scaramouche, he appears to be in Mondstadt on a mission from the Jester or Piero, investigating the unusual meteor shower. It's not clear whether this is an official Fatui mission or whether or not Piero just said something that prompted Scaramouche to check out the phenomenon for himself. Regardless, his findings during this event, that the sky is a lie, seem to have left a lasting impression. For those of you who weren't around for the Unreconciled Stars event, here's what I mean by the sky is a lie. Basically, the sky is actually a dome-like firmament littered with stars that are actually rocks known as Irminsul fruit. These fruit contain the consciousness of the people they belong to, forming patterns known as constellations that dictate one's fate, which is supposedly determined by the gods themselves. Now, by nature, Scaramouche isn't someone who believes that gods can or should meddle in his affairs. Learning that his fate is literally written in the stars probably came as a shock. But if this wasn't the fact that disturbed him, it was something relating to this, so let's just go with this for now. Fast forward a few in-game months and we meet Scaramouche again, this time in the depths of the Delusion Factory. It struck me as extremely odd that he seemed genuinely surprised that we were angry about the fact that delusions were being widely distributed. It's like he expected us at some level to recognize the benefits of giving people access to delusions. He certainly thinks they have some merit, at least, although his role in distributing and manufacturing them is currently unclear. This line implies that Scaramouche isn't even the mastermind behind the delusion operation, although he does seem to be participating rather actively. To what extent, I'm not sure. He then taunts us by telling us to go get the real mastermind, and he won't stop us. It's probably safe to assume that he doesn't care at all for any of his coworkers individually, and his arrogance suggests that he doesn't even think we'd be able to put a damper on their plans even if we did take out a harbinger or two. His confidence as he tells us about how important the Vision Hunt decree was to their operation also suggests that Scaramouche's current goals are in line with his own vendettas. Or were. At least, until he got a hold of the Gnosis for himself. Because at that point, Scaramouche had an interesting choice to make. Does he give the Gnosis to Signora or the Tsaritsa and gain some clout? Or does he keep it for himself and live up to his name of Kunikuzushi and use his newfound power to seize control over Inazuma himself? As of right now, it's very likely that the Gnosis is still in his possession. 3 days at least have passed since Yaemiko gave it to him, yet Signora seems to be completely unaware that he has it. That means Scaramouche has either kept it for himself for his own purposes, or gone to return it to the Tsaritsa directly. The latter actually seems really unlikely to me because Scaramouche doesn't really care much for gods. He may work with one currently, but what's better than working directly for a god? Becoming a god yourself. And he has the capacity because he's basically built like a god, right? And this is actually where Scaramouche gets very interesting to me because he has all the hallmarks of a very misguided hero character. Kind of like an anti-hero. He says, human life is worthless. And I know what this line sounds like, but in context, this doesn't actually sound like it's his opinion exactly. To me, the context makes it sound like this is what he's discovered as the truth of this world. It's how the world and maybe the gods perceive the value of human life. It's worthless to them. I say this because his next line is, they were always going to die. So who is they in this context? It's not all humans, it's the soldiers, because that's who was given the delusions, not humans in general. Scaramouche is suggesting that the soldiers were always going to die because they were probably fated to die as was written in the stars. So why not let them go out with a bang? Why not give them a real shot at changing their destiny? If only for a moment they could be really, truly free from the gods' oppression. I get that this sounds like a bit of a reach. I really, really do. But Scaramouche's words and actions contradict each other way too often for me to believe that he has one singular evil goal of erasing humanity as we know it. He's definitely no hero, but I don't think he's a villain either. He's working towards a very specific goal, and that goal is very likely going to match that of the travelers in the near future. Don't get me wrong though, Scaramouche isn't doing what he does in order to save everyone in the world, and his methods are definitely not the best. But while it doesn't weigh on his conscience like I feel like it probably should if he was a little more human, he does seem aware that his actions are awful. But for this appalling automaton, the ends definitely justify the means. And let's be clear, I am in no way trying to redeem Scaramouche as a character because it's this morally gray zone that he exists within that I find so interesting to begin with. He's acting in his own interest, and if it benefits other people, great. If not, also great. All he wants is to achieve his goal. Anything else is just icing on the cake. He's literally a loose cannon. But hey, speaking of the Traveler, does anyone else think it's weird that out of the 3 Harbingers we've met so far, only Scaramouche has actively tried to kill us? Twice. Signora had no interest in killing us and only fought us because we challenged her to a duel. And Child didn't really care that we got swept up in his attempt to flood Leeway Harbor, but he didn't directly target us either. It's almost like Scaramouche is aware of something regarding the Traveler that no one else is. Like a same hat kinda situation. Or he's just being a jerk. Either or. We'll look into that a little bit more in the Traveler's analysis video later on. What? What do you mean I missed something? I didn't miss anything. Totally didn't miss anything. I don't know what you're talking about. Okay. All right. Fine. I'll address the queen-sized elephant in the room. Yes, Scaramouche will do the fandango. Meaning, yes, I think he'll be playable for many, many reasons. One of them being that a couple of his voice actors, especially the one in Japanese, is really famous, and if they let that one go to waste for anything less than a playable character, that would be shocking to me. I mean, just think of the meme marketing that you could put around this guy. They've already started, like in A's story quest, for example. She discovers that she really enjoys dango milk, which would make her a fan of the dango milk, which means she might be doing the fandango. And the sheer amount of Bohemian Rhapsody puns that are in Inazuma, just kind of scattered everywhere, is absolutely ridiculous. And Scaramouche is responsible for all of those, simply because of his Fatui Harbinger title, but also because they went ahead and named his theme song the Ominous Fandango. What better marketing scheme could you have than getting people to think of your game and your character every time that one of the most popular songs of all times comes on? I mean, it has to be intentional that Scaramouche's entire backstory is literally the lyrics of Bohemian Rhapsody, right? Like, if it is not intentional and it's just a coincidence, then that's just spooky. That's all I'm saying. So let's do Scaramouche's backstory take 2, this time in Bohemian Rhapsody. Now, I won't read out the entirety of the lyrics, and I will not be playing the song on here because DMCA'd and all that fun stuff. Also, the song is like 6 minutes long. But I will be putting the lyrics on screen, so follow along as we revisit Scaramouche's backstory, Bohemian Rhapsody style. Basically, it goes like this. Scaramouche wakes up probably disoriented, but he's a poor boy who needs no sympathy. He rolls with whatever life gives him, but then there's an accident a la Rather Aged Notes where the blacksmith dies and he possibly experiences a small crisis. He has to convince himself that the death didn't matter. Eternity stretches out over a long time, after all. Then at his lowest low, the Fatui see a little silhouette of a man and give him the name Scaramouche. And he does the he decides to work for them. His powers are unlocked like very, very frightening thunderbolts and lightning, and then Piero sends him out to investigate the meteors, and Galileo being the reference point here as a famous astronomer. And here's where I start speculating. At this point, I think Scaramouche, after learning the truth of this world and of his own fate actually being written in the stars, he demands to be released from his shackles of destiny. Bismillah basically means in the name of God, the most gracious, the most merciful in Arabic. So we can assume he petitioned the gods either directly or just swore an oath to himself that he would no longer be bound by fate. Alternatively, he could have decided that he no longer wanted to work with the Fatui, but that seems like a bit of a stretch with our current information with his goals being aligned with theirs. Anyway, Beelzebub is literally his mother here, so having her put a devil aside for him is probably a reference to the gnosis that she relinquished. And this is where the Inazuma Archon quest ended, but I think these next lines foreshadow Scaramouche challenging A in combat in one way or another. The line, "So you think you can love me and leave me to die," is basically describing her abandoning him, as he sees it, shortly after he first woke. This could go one of two ways. Either Scaramouche is outright defeated by A, which would be kinda boring, or the Shogun puppet grows a little more emotionally and feels sympathy for her brother, hindering A's combat ability and lets Scaramouche get the upper hand only to successfully manage to talk him down and convince him not to kill, and developing her own personality at the same time, which I think would be really kind of cool for character development. Anywho, at that point, I hope he runs. Not far, just far enough for the traveler to find him. He's had his views challenged, and he's once again lost and alone until the traveler extends a hand and Scaramouche tries one more time to challenge his own destiny. Maybe with less questionable methods this time. We hope. Anyway, thanks so much for watching this video, you guys. I hope I was able to give you some more insight into Scaramouche's character, regardless of whether you love him or you hate him. His story is really fascinating to me, so fingers crossed my predictions hold and he will become a playable character in the near future. And for those of you grumbling about his imminent death simply because Senora got offed, well, I have a funny feeling she'll be back. Not the same way that we remember her, but she'll be back. And that's all from me for now, folks. Thanks again for watching. Take care, guys, and I'll catch you in the next video. Bye!